Welcome back, Thomas. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you again, Al. How are you doing today?
Good. I am doing well. I'm here in Santa Cruz. We had some fires recently, but the fire department and many others have done great job stamping it out. I mean, it's still going, but all
Um,
said and done, kids are back in school. We're healthy, so feeling very grateful. How about you? How you doing?
I'm doing as well as can be expected in 2020.
Yeah,
That's I feel like that's
yeah,
become a very loaded question this year. But I'm also
it has.
holding up. I'm based in San Francisco, so should have experienced what you did. But I'm actually in New Hampshire at the moment. I'm visiting family,
Oh
and
wow.
so that's been good to get a bit of a change of scenery and pace, and that is something that is bringing me joy amidst a heavy year.
Yeah, yeah, it certainly has been a heavy year, and you and I haven't been shy about talking about what's really happening in the world. And I have really reflected on our conversation a couple months ago. I don't know exactly the date it was, but one of the first things you said in response to a question that I posed around what would you like to see different, you said we should stop killing Black people. And
Mm,
that really was matter of fact and to the point, and tragically it has continued, and it
mhm,
has inspired some significant disruptions in sports, in media,
mhm.
and in life, and some of it's been good, and some of it obviously has not. So yeah, it has been in heavy, and so just to frame the conversation, we can wax social, justice and these things that might seem just adding to this conversation that might not drive any action for our listeners. But the idea that we can, in organizations, create an environment to facilitate discussion and potential change is something that you and I have agreed on. So, given where we were, 6, 8 weeks ago in our last discussion, where do you sit now, given everything that's transpired?
Yeah. Um, it feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it, Al?
It does.
I As I reflect on where I'm at, there's a part of me that is heartened and hopeful by what I've seen. And then I think there's another part that's deeply disappointed. And I think, like many parts of 2020, I'm holding both of those extreme emotions. So, on the exciting part, there's a new level of awareness, and not just awareness, but civic responsibility that I'm seeing at every level, that I'm seeing individuals take, that I'm seeing organizations take, that I'm seeing our political leaders take. And that is really, those are the seeds of change. But on the flip side, like you've said, the killing of Black people has not stopped. And in fact, what a lot of this increased awareness has really resulted in a bunch of civil unrest. And like you've said, some of which has really pushed the conversation forward, some of which I think has sometimes distracted from the conversation. We're now at a place where we're dealing with anarchy, where I think no matter where you are in your diversity journey, the idea that civilians are out there shooting other civilians is something to be deeply, deeply concerning about. I think as really the violence that I was talking about, Black people experiencing at the beginning is nearly now just expanding to our nation as a whole. It feels like it's getting larger rather than smaller. And the truth is, even if you aren't marching in the streets, there's nobody who is unaffected by this, right? Like, I think we carry the weight of this into our conversations at home, certainly into work. I know this is true of all our employees, but it is especially true for our Black employees at this time. I know it is true for me. I hear again and again about just the weight of kind of needing to put on this mask and try and figure out how to get your job done when it literally feels like stuff is burning around us. I
Yeah.
also think, oh, sorry. It looks like there's a bit of a delay.
No,
Please go for it.
no. You go. Continue, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the other factor in the midst of all of this, when we think about diversity, and inclusion across the board is that beyond the racial reckoning that we're having, COVID has had this really unfortunate, I think of it as a revealing of some of the underlying discrepancies that exist beyond race for all underrepresented minorities and women. Whether you're talking about the disproportionate health burden that some communities, communities of colors are bearing, or the disproportionate childcare duties and what that is doing for women in the workforce. I don't think the data is fully being collated yet, but I know anecdotally, I am hearing of scores of women who are needing to make the tough choice to pull out of the workforce and take significant steps back in their careers simply to make all of this work. And I'm aware that we're probably going to be kind of managing the impact on inequity across every group you can think of from this year for years to come.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And thank you for that amplification of that reality. Because one of the things that I have found frustrating, but also something that needs to be nudged and made visible and thus appropriate action taken on, is the fact that, yeah, there are people who are suffering. And meanwhile, there's organizations that need to get stuff done. And so how can you as the head of people manager development, how do you coach people leaders to have the discussion to better understand what's going on in people's life, man, woman, person of a diverse background? How do you do that? How do you create that safe place? Do you do it as a group? Do you do it individually? Obviously, if you do it as a group, it's like we're doing here, through a screen. So it's a tough ask. So what do you say?
I get this question a lot in my role as head of people manager development, because it is particularly people managers are in a really tough position now. As you think about, well, what is the boundary professionally? How do I make sure I'm not causing more trauma to the folks I'm working with? Like you said, Al, ultimately, we are here to do our jobs. So how do we make sure that we're driving results through all of this? And I wish there was a silver bullet. What I'm often hearing behind that question is, could you give me the 5-step plan to manage all of this? And I think the unfortunate answer is there isn't one. But I actually think there's actually some lightness in that, because the truth is, it's what I like to call situational leadership. The fact is, the right answer is as much dependent on the person sitting in front of you as it is on the context. And so actually, the one silver bullet, which will sound like a cop-out, is you've got to start by listening. And Al, you said, do we listen one-on-one? Do we listen in groups? And my answer is yes. The answer is both. I think one part of it is, what does it look like for us as a team? And I think this is where the personal and the professional really merge. Support each other to be able to do our best work during these really difficult times. What are the norms that we all need to agree on as a team in order to be successful? And that's as much a business conversation as it is a personal one. What is the space that people need? Do they need folks to bring things up or to give them a bit of time to engage with things over? Do we need to think about lightening our burden? I think we're all dealing with Zoom fatigue. Something we at ServiceNow are becoming increasingly regimented around is, where do we have no meetings as a team? We do no meeting Friday afternoons. I know at companies like Workday, they're considering no meeting Wednesday afternoons, but how do we build breaks into our norms to just support us to survive what's going on? But another piece I think is deeply personal, which is just checking in. And the good old, how are you really doing, is just as good as it ever has been. And then truly pausing for the immediate result. And what will come out is going to be uncomfortable, might feel overwhelming. And my last piece of advice is, you're dealing with adults. You are not going to solve the crisis of our country and really globe. And let's be real, there are at least 3 different crises that we're managing, between a health pandemic, with racial reckoning, and then the economic malaise that we are all dealing with. you're not going to be able to solve any of those three things in a conversation. What you can do in a conversation is communicate that where they're at is valid and that you are committed to walking by them on that journey. And just asking how you're really doing. And then the second question is there anything I can do to help? Is a really powerful way to start.
Yeah, I mean, I love that notion. I also want to have you respond to this idea or this reality that I see emerging, quite frankly, because I have too advocated that managers, leaders, colleagues open up, say, create safe place and hold people in safety. Like, really, how you doing? If you have 10 direct reports, and you have such conversations, with each once a week, and each conversation could be even a half hour. It's 5 hours. If it's an hour, it's you can get where I'm going. These are heavy things. Not everyone's skilled at it, even in the best of times. Even if they're skilled, that means they're putting forth energy. And anyway, it's hard. And so understanding where boundaries are, both personally and for others. And can you speak to that? Because I know you don't have a silver bullet on this, certainly, but I see people working longer and harder, and they're trying to connect, but the connection, it's just hard.
Yeah. Well, I have two answers to that. These two things occurred to me as you spoke. I'll answer the question directly, and then I think there's actually a more fundamental strategic question for organizational leaders to consider. So the first is, what do we do with our own limits and boundaries? And I am a big believer on putting your oxygen mask on first. Your ability to lead at this time is directly proportional to your ability to take care of yourself. And so my first thing to leaders is, before you start asking your team what they need, have you taken a moment to check in on what you need? And I think those are very simple things, like, when's the last time you as a leader took some time off? Have you taken a moment to reflect on how what's going on is affecting you? What do you need to be successful and feel supported during this time? The clearer your answers to those questions, the better your ability to go out and lead. And so my first encouragement to leaders is, take a moment to invest in yourself first so that you can invest in others. I liken it to the analogy that when I was learning to be a lifeguard, one of the first lessons that we were taught is that sometimes you're going to see someone thrashing in the water. And the first question needs to be not, are they drowning, but am I strong enough to pull them out? Because if the answer isn't yes, all you're going to do is pull both of you down together. And I see a lot of managers failing to ask that first question. Do I have what I need to pull them? Because you diving in before you've taken care of yourself is just going to add to the number of bodies sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Yeah. But the second question,
no, I'm just celebrating. Sorry. Yes. I mean, I really like that you're emphasizing that point. It's oftentimes blushed by, and even if someone says they're doing it, they're not doing it to the extent that they need to. You're absolutely right. I love it. So please continue.
Yeah, no. And thank you so much, Al, for being so gracious with what feels like a bit of a time delay. I always appreciate that about engaging with you. But the second thing that I wanted to think about, and really is a question not for a frontline manager, but for organizational leaders. I've been saying for years now that most organizations have not rightly sized the manager role. So Al, I love the example you gave. You have 10 direct reports. Where are you going to find time to check in with them every 2 weeks? I think that is core to the manager's job. And our real issue today is that we've not set up managers for success, whether these player coaches, where they're literally spending so much time doing the actual work, they're not leading their teams. And that's not only is that not the most effective way to scale, it just means that you're losing a ton of value, because the real job of a people manager isn't to get more work done. If you really needed that, just bring on one more IC. The job of a people manager is to, one, make sure that team cohesively organizes their work so that they're able to perform in sync together to the best of their ability. Two, be able to look ahead at what's coming so we can organize the work as it needs to come in and make sure you're doing the right prioritizing. And three, clearing out roadblocks for their ICs so they're able to be successful. All of those things require you to have the time, the space of mind, and quite frankly, the space of day that this requires. This merely is just the latest challenge in our way. And if there's anything this crisis is revealing to us, or these series of crises, it's that we had not set our managers up for success if they cannot deal with something like this. Because trust me, the manager who cannot make the time to have these kinds of conversations wasn't able to make the time to strategically plan for their team a year out, wasn't able to make the time to understand what their team's personal motivations were for success and how to best align that with the work to make them successful. And so in many ways, it's just revealing an inefficiency in the org design that we really need to take a deeper look at.
Yeah, man, I love the way you think. I love the way you're expressing this, because it's a really, really important point. And I think it's been a big miss at the aggregate level when you talk about workforce planning. You just like throw work at people and have them figure it out. Meanwhile, they don't have the time to connect. That is, managers don't have time to connect with their teams and so forth. So my question that is related, and I know you're steeped in data and analytics, and I know that was core to what you were doing at Tribe as well. Digital insights. So we have all this data that's being generated given remote work, and how much time people are spending on their computers, how many meetings they're having, how many emails they're sending, all this stuff. So that then speaks to workload, capacity, these notions. So when we talk about empathizing, do you advocate that this data be better observed and taken action on? Some organizations are steeped in such insights and they have dashboards that provide visibility. Others don't. So if organizations have not prioritized putting such data in managers' hands, I imagine you would say, go do it, maybe not. But is this something that's core to what you believe in terms of how we're going to manage in this remote work reality that we're in?
Absolutely. And I'd say yes and. So the yes piece is one of the biggest challenges that have existed with kind of digitizing our employee footprint is that historically, the higher up the value chain the employee went in terms of what they did, the more of their work did not have a digital footprint, right? Like the more time your designers are spending in a room, et cetera. We are in this unique period of time where that is being completely thrown out the window. And it behooves us to take advantage of that. We finally can say with real confidence, like you were pointing in, where are people spending their time? What are they finding most value in? What are the points of connection in the org? And I'm encouraging organizations to think about using that data once again at three levels. And you called out some of them. I'm just putting them back together. The first, and I think most important, is just by surfacing that to the individuals themselves. I think oftentimes organizations think about this last. I think it needs to come first. It needs to come first from a data privacy and confidence perspective, but also because that's the point of action, right? Microsoft has a really wonderful workplace analytics solution that just exists on top of Outlook, and that's what we use at ServiceNow. But there are a number of other solutions out there, just giving managers insights about where their time is going and what the implications for that might mean. We increasingly are also taking a diversity and inclusion lens to that. Where as a manager am I spending my time across my team? Are there people I tend to inadvertently ignore? Where might my unconscious bias show up in the kind of Slack messages or emails I send? And how can I use that to help me show up in the way that I want to? So that's one level. But another one is really at the workforce planning perspective. What is all the activity we are seeing telling us about silos in the organization, points of connection or lack thereof, about places of inefficiency? And I do see the next frontier of workforce planning as really being, ironically, much more reactive. And I mean that in a good way. So rather than kind of sitting off in your ivory tower and asking yourself the question, well, what should it be? Instead, looking at what is and being able to identify and experiment. Well, what would certain changes or navigations here result in from a time and efficiency perspective? And then being able to see those in real time.
Yeah. No, yeah. Yes, yes, and yes. To echo what you were saying earlier, because it is the case where your point is spot on in my view, in that yes, organizations were having these strategies. They were saying this is our financial constraint. We're going to have this number of employees. So it was a kind of systematic organizational centric approach and not a people centric approach. And now we have the ability to do that. And I would go so far as to say it's irresponsible not to take that tact. It's good, create some misses, undue risk for the organization, and on down the line. But there's great opportunity if an organization does it. I want to toggle just a little bit, but it's adjacent to this, because you and I are both committed to social justice and making the world a better place. And there has been organizations that have taken this upheaval in American society, at least, as an opportunity to facilitate discussions in the workplace. And historically, diversity, equity, and inclusion officers, if they've had that level, have been under-resourced. They've been largely in an influencer role. But now, to your point, there's a whole host of digital assets that are being generated. It's top of mind for everybody. So my question to you, what are you seeing, or what would you like to see different that is going to have the workplace be a facilitator of positive social change and healing, as opposed to a perpetuator? Because there are those organizations who aren't really doing anything, and they're kind of rubber stamping it, which scares the out of me, But so, what are your thoughts there?
So first, just acknowledging the if you're not helping, you're hurting with this, and it does not need any ill will. I think last time we were together, Al, you and I both talked about, well, when a river is moving one way, if you're not moving upstream, you're just moving in the direction of the river. And unfortunately, the river of equity in our country and across our globe is not moving in the right direction. And so unless there's tangible action happening to move, you're likely just perpetuating the problem, like you said, and making things worse. But I think the problem is actually more dire than that. You mentioned the fact that historically, a lot of folks in our DI roles have been under-resourced, and that is absolutely true. And yet we are spending quite a bit on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's estimated that in the US today, it's anywhere from a $15 to $20 billion industry and growing. And yet over that 10 years, where we've grown from spending zero spend to 20 billion, we've not really seen much move, right? We've seen the number of Black men in management at US companies over that time period move from 3% to 3.2%. People of color hold about 15% of Fortune 500 board seats. That's up from about 12% 10 years ago. And so just from a sheer ROI perspective, the things that we've been doing have not been good enough. And so the first thing that I'm always saying is we need to do something differently. If your DE&I strategy right now is more of the same, well, we have a decade worth of evidence about what more of the same gets us. And it's really not good enough. And I think on one hand, that can be a little scary for folks. But I think it's actually this wonderful opportunity, because it means that we are now tasked not so much with implementing and executing, but innovating and experimenting. And so my big kind of challenge out to organizations is, where are you innovating? What are you doing today that is different from what you did last year? And most importantly, when we think about it as people analytics folks, how are you thinking about measuring impact and learning what does and doesn't work? And this is actually, this piece about learning what does and doesn't work is something I'm really passionate about, Al, because I think that when we shift our minds from execution to innovation, failure or programs that don't yield the results we want look very different. If we're doing the right kind of people analytics behind and really learning, then failure, like in all experimentation, is just a path of getting forward. by all means, please let us know what doesn't work so that we don't keep wasting money on it. And as we continue to learn to guide what will work. And so for me, the difference between what makes a program a waste of money and something that's valuable isn't so much what the outcomes were, but how committed we were to measuring them. And hopefully, and this is my challenge, actually sharing them, because this is a big problem that no one company is going to figure out on their own. And my vision, and actually something I'm working on, is how do we start coming together really as a D&I research collaborative, sharing what we're doing so that we can take advantage of a scale that isn't possible at any one company level to really understand what each of us are learning from our wins and, yes, our failures in order to get so. And I've been able to actually identify 2 research partners at Harvard and Wharton who are really excited in adding some of the academics of the statistics and people analytics to this effort. I'm hoping to gather a number of organizations in this journey as well.
Well, let me know how I can help. I'll gladly recruit on your behalf because it's certainly a much needed, worthwhile cause. And yeah, no, that's very, very exciting. I want to, as we start to wrap up, I want to end on, I know it's a very challenging time, particularly for you and other Black Americans. I grew up in a very diverse environment, playing sports, football and basketball, and the idea that this is happening in 2020, it's really it's hard for me to get my head around, and I know millions of others feel similarly. And I also want to share this idea. Is I heard on radio recently that tourism is walking arm in arm with peace. And that might seem like a bit of a non sequitur, but the essence of the argument was that if we go and visit others and talk with others and walk in their shoes for a bit, then our ability to empathize is heightened. Mm. And obviously, we're restricted by COVID right now. However, learning about another culture, learning about other people's and their struggles and what they do for fun and what they celebrate can be a very enjoyable experience. And we have this heavy weight on this topic right now. And I think that heavy weight scares people, particularly non-minorities, from entering into the conversation. So my question to you is, do you hope that we get to a point that we can actually engage in these conversations with enthusiasm and curiosity and kindness, as opposed to this dread and heaviness? Not that to diminish the dread and heaviness, and the accuracy of American history has to be told, and that those are hard conversations, hard realities to grasp. However, there's also a lot of joy. Chadwick Boseman's passing has been just gorgeous to watch people honor him. And so what are your thoughts on, kind of embracing the opportunity to learn about other people's and their struggles?
Well, no surprise. I wholeheartedly encourage it, celebrate it. I love your reminder that it's actually one of the most incredible, fun things that you can do to learn about a different culture and really learn more about yourself by exploring difference. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that's really hard for people, though, in this is there are 2 things that are deeply related, but also deeply distinct. One is systemic inequity, and the other is bias and individualized bias. Absolutely having conversations with people and learning is going to help affect our bias. Because so much of our bias, what is our unconscious bias except stories that we tell ourselves without enough information? And so how do you solve that? Well, you broaden the information that you get, learn and explore other cultures. That being said, there's actually, and I think this is what can be non-intuitive for people, is that there's actually a very tenuous connection between that individual interaction and systemic inequity, right? There are lots and lots of people who inadvertently perpetuate systemic inequity and love the people who are different from them in their own lives, not out of malice, but because these systems, if not actively broken down, self-perpetuate themselves. That's what makes them so difficult. And so I think as we go on this journey, balancing both of those is going to be absolutely vital because they are related. Often the energy to fight the systemic injustice comes from knowing people and knowing their stories. And so I think that is always the place that we need to start. How do I build empathy by just learning from other people's stories? But I'm also aware that we must marry that compassion with action if we have any hope to go beyond shifting an interpersonal relationship to actually systemically changing the outcomes for huge swath of disadvantaged people, both here in the US and the world at large.
Well, Thomas, you are outstanding at what you do. You're an outstanding human being. I'm honored that you shared your insights and ideas with me and our audience today. And yeah, you wish you well, and hope to get together with you before too long. When you coming back from New Hampshire, if I may ask, and how can people learn more about you and what you're doing?
Fantastic. So I will be back in October. So just one more month, and then I'm back in good old Cali. If folks want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. So that is absolutely great. I'm also deep friend and supporter of PAFOW. So Al, I'm going to ask if anyone reaches out to you, absolutely, particularly as we think through the research collaborative. Would love to partner with any folks who are leaders in their organizations who think that joining this second wave of really sharing programmatic experiments so we can understand and learn what really matters in D&I and make sure that the next decade doesn't look like the last one. I'd love to join arms. So reach out on LinkedIn.
All right, Thomas. Yeah, again, thank you. You be well, and we'll be in touch. Yeah.
Thank you. You as well.